The divorce papers were signed in a hospital hallway that still smelled of antiseptic and blood. Marilyn Lynn Parker lay unconscious behind double doors, her body stitched together after an emergency C-section that saved 3 premature babies. Machines hummed with a haunting rhythm, and red lights blinked in the dimness of the intensive care unit. Somewhere inside that sterile labyrinth, a nurse whispered prayers for a miracle. Outside, Grant Holloway adjusted his tailored suit, took the silver pen from his lawyer, and signed his name without a single moment of hesitation. Only 10 minutes earlier, Lynn had almost died on the operating table, her heart nearly failing as surgeons fought to bring their children into the world. Grant didn't ask if his children were breathing on their own. He didn't ask if his wife would ever wake up to see them. He only asked the lawyer one question: how fast this could be finalized. The answer was simple, immediate, clean, and silent. It was exactly how he liked his business deals. A doctor stepped out, exhaustion carved into every line of her face. She looked at Grant with eyes that had seen too much tragedy. "Your wife is critical," she said. "She needs her family." "I am no longer her husband," Grant interrupted, sliding the leather folder closed with a crisp, chilling snap. His voice was calm, almost bored, as if he were discussing a minor clerical error in a contract. "Update her family, whoever they are." The doctor replied with a hollow stare, "And by them, there is no family." Grant paused for half a second, then nodded as if that solved everything. He turned and walked away, his expensive leather shoes echoing down the corridor, past framed photos of smiling newborns and hopeful parents. Behind him, 3 tiny infants fought for air in clear plastic incubators, completely abandoned by their father. By morning, Lynn would wake up divorced, uninsured, and legally powerless over her own children. Grant, meanwhile, rode down to the underground garage where his black Mercedes waited with the engine running. He checked his phone, and a message from Belle Knox lit the screen. "Is it done?" He typed back one word: "Yes." As the car pulled into the aggressive surge of Manhattan traffic, Grant allowed himself a smile. The timing was perfect. No messy custody battles, no fragile wife slowing him down, and no emotional baggage to carry into the next fiscal quarter. In 6 weeks, his company would enter its most important funding round. Investors wanted strength, not sentiment. They wanted a man who could cut ties cleanly and keep moving toward the profit. Up in the ICU, a nurse gently placed Lynn's trembling hand against the glass of the incubator. The babies were alive, but barely. Lynn's lips moved as if trying to apologize to them for something she didn't yet understand. What no one in that hallway knew, not the doctors, not the lawyers, not even Grant himself, was that the moment he signed those papers, he triggered a chain of consequences that would dismantle everything he believed he owned. The woman he had just erased was about to become the most dangerous mistake of his life. Marilyn Lynn Parker woke to the sound of an alarm she didn't recognize and a weight in her body that felt entirely wrong, like something essential had been taken and not returned. Her throat was dry, her head throbbed, and for a long moment, she couldn't remember where she was or why she couldn't move her legs. Then the pain rushed back in a violent wave. She tried to sit up, but a sharp ache tore through her abdomen, forcing a gasp from her lips. A nurse hurried to her side, pressing a gentle, steadying hand against her shoulder. "Easy," the woman said softly. "You've been through a lot." "My babies," Lynn whispered. Her voice was cracked and raw from the breathing tube that had been removed hours earlier. "Where are my babies?" The nurse hesitated. It wasn't long, but it was long enough to send a chill through Lynn's chest. "They are in the NICU," the nurse said. "They are alive, fighting, and very small but stable for now." Relief flooded Lynn so fast it made her dizzy. Tears slid down the sides of her face and soaked into the pillow. "Can I see them?" she pleaded. The nurse looked away, avoiding her gaze. "There are some things we need to go over first." A man Lynn had never seen stepped into the room, holding a tablet instead of flowers. He wore a hospital badge that didn't list him as medical staff. "Mrs. Parker," he said, then corrected himself without a hint of apology. "Miss Parker in room 202. The word landed harder than the surgery. "There has been a change to your marital status," he continued, his voice flat and professional. Your divorce was finalized early this morning. Lynn stared at him, certain she had misheard. That is not possible, she said. I was unconscious. Yes, he replied, but the paperwork was valid and the filing was immediate. Her heart began to race. Grant wouldn't do this. He already did, the man said. He tapped the screen and turned it toward her. Grant's signature stared back at her, bold and familiar. Her own name appeared beneath it, printed, authorized, and executed. The date, the time, and the details were all precise and final. You are no longer covered under Mr. Holloway's insurance, he went on. Hospital administration has reassigned your room. Your children's medical decisions are currently under review pending custody clarification. Lynn's fingers curled into the hospital sheets. Those are my children. Is that ever Stemley? The man replied that such things were currently being determined. The room began to spin. Where is he? She demanded. I want to see my husband. The man met her eyes for the first time with a look of cold indifference. Mr. Holloway has declined further involvement. After he left, the nurse returned with a wheelchair instead of comfort. Lynn was transferred to a smaller room on a different floor. No windows, no monitors, no warmth. She was given a thin blanket and a clipboard of forms she could barely read through the tears. Hours later, she was wheeled past the NICU. She saw them through the glass, 3 tiny bodies wrapped in wires and plastic, fighting battles she couldn't fight for them. She reached out, but the chair kept moving. That was when Lynn finally understood the truth. She hadn't just been divorced. She had been erased. And as she lay alone that night, clutching the hospital bracelet Grant had paid to remove, a knock sounded softly at her door. It was a knock that would change everything she believed about how alone she truly was. Grant Holloway stood in front of the mirror in his Park Avenue penthouse, adjusting the cuffs of his custom shirt as sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows. Manhattan stretched below him, sharp and obedient, exactly how he liked it. Everything was quiet, controlled, and clean. His phone buzzed on the marble counter. It was a calendar alert for an investor breakfast at 9:00 a.m. He took a sip of black coffee, scrolling through overnight messages, congratulatory notes, and a few cautious inquiries. There was no resistance and no backlash. The divorce had gone through exactly as his lawyer promised. He hadn't slept much, but it didn't matter. He felt lighter than he had in months. No more hospital visits, no more emotional landmines, and no more explanations. Lynn had become a liability the moment the pregnancy turned complicated. 3 premature babies were not a blessing in his world. They were a risk, and risk was something Grant Holloway eliminated early. He grabbed his phone and dialed a number he had memorized long before the ink on the divorce papers dried. It is done, he said when Belle answered. She laughed softly on the other end, the sound bright and relieved. I told you it would work out. You just needed to be decisive. I always am, Grant smiled. Belle was already waiting for him at the plaza later that night, coordinating a small strategic appearance. It was nothing public yet, just enough to plant the idea of a fresh start and a new image. He wanted a woman who fit beside him instead of slowing behind him. As he stepped into the elevator, Grant allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The narrative was his to control now. He was the CEO who made hard choices. The man who didn't let personal weakness interfere with professional growth. No one would ask where Lynn went. By mid-morning, he sat at the head of a glass conference table overlooking Wall Street. His fingers wrapped around a Mont Blanc pen as he spoke to potential investors. He talked about numbers, growth, and expansion. Confidence radiated from him. This company is entering its strongest phase, Grant said smoothly. No distractions and no instability. The men across from him nodded, impressed by his cold focus. Then his assistant slipped into the room and leaned close. Sir, she whispered, there is an issue with one of the funding channels. Grant frowned. Which one? The Parker Hale Trust. The name barely registered at first. We don't work with them, he said. Not directly, the assistant replied, but their capital influences 2 of our secondary partners. They have paused all transactions pending a review. Grant leaned back, masking his irritation. That is temporary. Yes, she replied, but they have requested updated disclosures on personal risk exposure. Grant's jaw tightened. I will handle it. The meeting resumed, but something had shifted. For the first time that day, Grant felt a faint edge of unease. He pushed it away. He had lawyers, advisors, and influence. This was nothing. Outside, his phone buzzed again with an unknown number. He ignored it. Up in a quiet hospital room across the city, Marilyn Lynn Parker stared at the ceiling, unaware that her name had just surfaced in rooms Grant believed she would never enter. And as Grant stood to shake hands with investors, convinced he had cut the past cleanly away, the message he ignored waited patiently on his screen. The system he trusted was already moving against him, and the woman he discarded had become the silent variable he could no longer control. The transfer happened without ceremony. Marilyn Lynn Parker woke from a shallow sleep to the sound of wheels rolling and voices she didn't recognize. Her chart was lifted from the foot of her bed. The four-pole rattled as it was disconnected and reattached. No one explained anything until she asked, her voice thin and unsteady, "Where are you taking me?" A nurse avoided her eyes. "Administration orders," she said. They moved her from the private recovery wing Grant had insisted on months earlier to a general postpartum floor on the other side of the hospital. The lighting was harsher and the walls were bare. The room smelled faintly of bleach instead of lavender sanitizer. Her new bed squeaked when she shifted, and the blanket was so thin she could feel the chill through it. Lynn stared at the ceiling, trying to understand how things had changed so fast. An hour later, a billing coordinator appeared with a practiced smile and a clipboard full of numbers. "We just need to review your coverage," she said brightly. Lynn swallowed hard. "My husband," she started. The woman's fingers paused for a fraction of a second. "Your former husband terminated authorization this morning." The words settled slowly, like dust after a collapse. "So what does that mean?" Lynn asked. "It means," the coordinator replied, lowering her voice, "that extended care for your children will require alternative arrangements." Lynn's heart slammed against her ribs. "They are premature. They need machines." "Yes," the woman said gently, "which is why we need confirmation of payment responsibility." Payment responsibility, words that felt obscene when spoken about 3 infants fighting to breathe. That afternoon, Lynn was wheeled past the NICU again, this time intentionally. She begged the orderly to stop just for a moment. He hesitated, then slowed. She pressed her palm against the glass. 3 incubators, 3 lives. One of them twitched weakly, a tiny hand curling around nothing. "I am here," Lynn whispered, though they couldn't hear her. "I am not leaving." Behind her, a voice cleared. "Miss Parker," a hospital administrator said, his tone clipped. "We need to discuss discharge planning." "Discharge?" Lynn turned, panic rising. "I can't be discharged. I can barely walk." "Medically," the woman replied, "you are stable enough to recover at home." "I don't have a home," Lynn said. The administrator nodded once, as if that had already been noted. "You will need to arrange temporary accommodation." The cruelty wasn't loud. It didn't shout or threaten. It moved through paperwork and policy, signatures and silence. By evening, Lynn's meals were downgraded and her pain medication was reduced. In the darkness of her room, she lay alone, listening to the distant cries of other newborns, wondering if her children cried the same way. Across the city, Grant Holloway signed off on the final insurance cancellation with the same efficiency he applied to quarterly reports. It wasn't personal, he told himself. It was necessary. Hospitals found solutions. People adjusted. Back in her room, Lynn stared at her phone. Scrolling through unanswered messages she had sent Grant hours earlier. None were delivered. All were blocked. Her hands trembled as she typed one final message she knew would never be read. "They need me. Please." She didn't send it. Instead, she curled onto her side, protecting a body that had already given everything it had, and let the truth settle fully for the first time. Grant hadn't just left. He was actively making sure she couldn't survive without him. But as the lights dimmed and Lynn closed her eyes, unaware eyes were already watching this injustice closely. A single decision was made somewhere else in the hospital, one that would quietly undo Grant's careful cruelty. The decision was made in a quiet office at the end of the ICU corridor, far from the administrators and their clipboards. Dr. Naomi Reed stood with her arms crossed, staring at the medical chart glowing on her computer screen. 3 patient IDs, 3 premature infants, all born under extreme conditions, all suddenly flagged for financial review. She had seen this before, not often, but enough to recognize it when it happened. Power stepping in where compassion should have been. Naomi removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. She had been a neonatologist for over 20 years. She had watched babies survive impossible odds and watched others slip away because someone higher up decided their lives were too expensive. The system never called it cruelty, it called it policy. A junior nurse knocked lightly on the open door. "Dr. Reed, administration wants confirmation on the Parker triplets." Naomi looked up. "Confirmation of what?" "That we are prepared to downgrade intervention if coverage lapses," the nurse said quietly, shame flickering across her face. Naomi's jaw tightened. Absolutely not. She stood and walked briskly toward the NICU, her heels echoing with purpose. The room was dim, filled with the steady rhythm of machines doing the work lungs were too small to manage alone. She stopped at the first incubator, watching the baby's chest rise and fall with mechanical assistance. "They are stable," Naomi said aloud, more to herself than anyone else. Fragile but stable. She pulled up the mother's file. Marilyn Parker, 31, emergency C-section, severe blood loss, no next of kin listed, divorced hours after surgery. Naomi's eyes narrowed. She walked back to her office and opened a secure file folder she hadn't touched in years. Inside were copies of incident reports, sworn statements, and legal guidance she had saved after a similar case nearly destroyed a young mother's life a decade earlier. She picked up her phone and dialed a number from memory. Ethan Cole, a man, answered after 2 rings. "It is Naomi Reed," she said. "I need legal counsel. Not for the hospital, but for a patient." There was a pause. "That is a rare call," Ethan replied. "What is happening?" Naomi explained everything: the divorce, the insurance termination, and the attempt to pressure medical decisions based on money. When she finished, the line was silent for a long moment. "Do you know who Marilyn Parker is?" Ethan finally asked. "No," Naomi said honestly, "just that she is being crushed." Ethan exhaled slowly. "Then listen carefully. Do not let them move those babies. Document everything, every conversation, every request, every signature." Naomi's pulse quickened. "Why?" "Because," he said, his voice grave, "this isn't just a custody dispute. This name is connected to a trust that hasn't surfaced in over a decade." Naomi closed her eyes briefly. She had trusted her instinct, and it hadn't failed her. She returned to the NICU and spoke to her team with calm authority. "No changes to treatment plans without my approval. If anyone pressures you, send them to me." That evening, Naomi visited Lynn's room herself. Lynn looked small in the hospital bed, her eyes hollow with exhaustion and fear. "I am Dr. Reed," Naomi said gently. "I oversee the NICU." Lynn struggled to sit up. "Are my babies?" "They are alive," Naomi said firmly, "and they will stay that way." Tears spilled down Lynn's cheeks. "They're trying to take them from me." Naomi took her hand. "Not without a fight." As Naomi left the room, she sent one final email marked confidential, attaching every documented irregularity. Somewhere across the city, a legal mechanism long dormant began to stir. And for the first time since Grant Holloway signed those papers, the balance quietly shifted. The knock came just after midnight. Soft but deliberate, the kind that didn't belong to a nurse making rounds. Marilyn Lynn Parker stirred from a restless half-sleep, her body aching in places she hadn't known could hurt. For a moment, she wondered if she had imagined it. Then the knock came again. "Yes," she whispered. The door opened slowly. A man in his early 40s stepped inside. He was tall, neatly dressed, his coat folded over one arm as if he had come straight from somewhere important. He didn't look like hospital staff. He looked like someone who lived in conference rooms and courtrooms. "My name is Ethan Cole," he said quietly. "I am here because Dr. Naomi Reed asked me to come." Lynn pushed herself up on the pillow, panic flaring. "Is something wrong with my babies?" "No," Ethan said quickly, "they're stable. This isn't about their condition. It is about your name." She frowned. "You already know my name." "Yes," he replied, pulling a chair closer to the bed, "but I don't think you know what it means." Lynn let out a bitter laugh. "It means I trusted the wrong man." Ethan didn't smile. "It means Parker." The word hung in the air, unfamiliar and heavy. "My mother's maiden name," Lynn said slowly. "Why?" Ethan opened his briefcase and removed a single sealed envelope, thick and yellowed with age. "Because your grandmother, Eleanor Parker Hale, built one of the most private investment trusts on the East Coast, and you are listed as her sole surviving beneficiary." Lynn stared at him. Certain exhaustion had finally pushed her into a hallucination. "That is not possible," she said. "My grandmother died years ago. If there was money, someone would have told me." "They tried," Ethan said gently, "but the trust was locked in litigation. Family disputes and challenges. It has been frozen for 12 years. Lynn's chest tightened. "So why now?" "Because of a clause," Ethan replied, "one that activates only after the birth of legitimate heirs. Multiple heirs, to be exact." Her breath caught. "My children?" "Yes." The room felt suddenly too small. "So what does that mean?" Lynn asked. "That I have access to it now." Ethan shook his head. "Not immediately. There is a mandatory review period of 90 days. Until then, the assets remain inaccessible." Hope flared, then dimmed. "So it doesn't help me," she said softly. "Not now." "It helps you more than you realize," Ethan said. "Because from the moment that clause was triggered, you became legally protected." He leaned forward. "Your ex-husband's actions, cutting insurance, interfering with medical care, are now documented as attempts to leverage financial harm against a protected beneficiary." Lynn's hands trembled. "Grant didn't know any of this." "No," Ethan said, "and that may be his biggest mistake." Tears slid down Lynn's cheeks. This time they weren't from despair, but from something sharp and unfamiliar: validation. Proof that she hadn't been wrong to feel erased. "So what happens now?" she asked. Ethan closed the briefcase. "Now we wait. And we make sure you and your children survive long enough to collect what was always meant to be yours." He stood, pausing at the door. "One more thing. From this moment on, everything Grant does will be watched." After he left, Lynn lay back against the pillow, her mind racing. For the first time since she woke up alone, she didn't feel invisible. Because somewhere beyond the hospital walls, a dormant empire had just recognized its rightful heir. And it was only a matter of time before the man who cast her aside realized who he had truly divorced. The 90-day review period sounded reasonable on paper, but in real life, it felt like a sentence. Marilyn Lynn Parker was discharged 2 days later with a prescription she couldn't afford to refill and instructions that assumed she had a home, support, and rest waiting for her. None of that existed. She left the hospital in a borrowed coat, her hospital bag lighter than when she had arrived months earlier. No babies in her arms, just paperwork and pain. At the curb, she hesitated before opening her phone. She had $47 left in her account. Enough for one ride. She chose an Uber instead of a taxi because it was cheaper, not because she knew where she was going. "Where to?" the driver asked. Lynn swallowed hard. "Anywhere with a long-term stay discount." "To Queens," she said. The driver nodded without judgment and pulled into traffic. The temporary studio she found was on the edge of the borough, small and quiet, with a bed that creaked and a kitchenette that barely worked. It smelled faintly of old coffee and cleaning solution. Lynn didn't care. It was a place to lie down without being told she was costing someone money. Every morning, she returned to the hospital by subway, her body stiff with healing muscles and stitched skin. She stood outside the NICU glass for hours, memorizing every monitor number and every nurse's face. She learned the sound of each baby's breathing machine. One was stronger, one was slower, and one frightened her every time the alarm dipped. She wasn't allowed to touch them yet. Soon, they kept saying. Grant Holloway never came. On day 5, a letter arrived at the studio, forwarded by the hospital. It was official and heavy. It informed Lynn that her former husband had filed for an emergency custody review, citing maternal instability and a lack of financial capacity. Her hands shook as she read it twice, then a third time. That night, she called Ethan Cole. "He is trying to take them," she said, her voice breaking. "I know," Ethan replied calmly. He filed the moment he realized the trust was involved. "So he does know now," Lynn whispered. "He knows something," Ethan corrected, "but not enough." The next week tested her in ways surgery never had. Her pain flared without medication, and sleep came in fragments. Some days she skipped meals to save money for transportation. She learned how cold New York could feel when you were invisible. Grant, meanwhile, told anyone who asked that Lynn was unwell and refusing help. Belle Knox appeared beside him at dinners and charity meetings, her hand resting confidently on his arm. Photos surfaced online, smiles, champagne, and control. Lynn saw them once, accidentally, on a cracked phone screen while sitting alone on the subway. She didn't cry. On the 12th day, one of the babies crashed. Lynn was called in from the hallway and watched doctors move with frightening speed. She pressed her hands together so tightly her knuckles went white, whispering promises she didn't know how to keep. They stabilized the baby barely. That night, Lynn sat on the edge of the studio bed, staring at the wall, exhaustion dragging her under. 90 days felt impossible. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "Miss Parker, this is Julian Cross. Ethan Cole suggested we speak. I believe I can help, but not the way you expect." Lynn stared at the screen, her heart pounding, because for the first time since everything fell apart, someone wasn't offering sympathy. They were offering leverage. Marilyn Lynn Parker didn't reply to the message right away. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed rereading the name, Julian Cross. It meant nothing to her, yet Ethan Cole wouldn't have suggested the call lightly. She typed back a single word, "How?" The response came almost instantly. "Meet me tomorrow in Midtown. I will send the address." By the next afternoon, Lynn stood outside a quiet office building tucked between two glass towers near Bryant Park. No sign, no luxury logo, just clean lines and a discreet security desk. She adjusted the borrowed coat and stepped inside. Julian Cross rose when she entered the conference room. He was in his mid-40s, calm and unflashy, dressed in a simple dark suit that didn't try to impress. His eyes were observant, as if he had already read her story and was now studying the footnotes. "Miss Parker," he said, "thank you for coming." Lynn shook his hand, then sat, folding her hands tightly in her lap. "You said you could help." "Yes," Julian replied, "but first, I need you to understand something. I am not here to rescue you." She nodded slowly. "Good. I don't need saving." A flicker of approval crossed his face. "I know. What I offer is structure, time, and silence." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents for temporary housing arrangements near the hospital and a modest stipend labeled as a consultancy retainer. There was no mention of charity or pity. "This keeps you afloat during the review period," Julian said. "It doesn't touch the trust, it doesn't alert your ex-husband, and it doesn't compromise your legal position." Lynn stared at the papers. "Why?" Julian leaned back. "Because I have a long-standing interest in Parker Hale assets, and because I don't like bullies who mistake patience for weakness." She swallowed hard. "Grant doesn't know you." "He doesn't need to," Julian said. "Not yet." Lynn hesitated, then asked the question that had been burning since the hospital. "What happens if the review fails?" Julian's gaze didn't waver. "It won't. But even if it did, Grant would still lose." That caught her attention. "How?" "Because," Julian said calmly, "he has already overplayed his hand. Custody threats, financial pressure, public narrative manipulation. Judges don't like patterns, especially when they are documented." Lynn exhaled, something loosening in her chest. "So, what do you need from me?" "Nothing," Julian replied, "except one thing. Do not react. Let him think you are exhausted. Let him believe you are cornered." She gave a small, tired smile. "I am exhausted." "Yes," Julian said gently, but you are not cornered anymore. Over the next 2 weeks, Lynn's life shifted quietly. She moved into a small furnished apartment 10 minutes from the hospital. She ate full meals again and was finally allowed to touch her baby's skin to skin, whispering promises against their fragile warmth. Grant filed motions and leaked concerns. He waited for her to break. She didn't. Late one night, as Lynn sat beside the NICU, one baby's tiny fingers curled around hers for the first time. She felt it then, not hope exactly, but certainty. The ground was no longer moving beneath her. And somewhere across the city, Grant Holloway mistook her silence for surrender, never realizing that the most dangerous phase of the game had just begun. Grant Holloway noticed the silence during the 3rd week. It wasn't dramatic. No angry messages, no emotional emails, and no public accusations. Marilyn Lynn Parker had vanished from his radar so completely that it unsettled him. At first, he welcomed it. Silence meant compliance. But silence, when it lasted too long, began to feel like something else. Grant sat in his office, scrolling through his phone while a stock ticker crawled across the screen behind his desk. Still nothing from Miss Parker, his assistant said carefully. Grant scoffed. Of course not. She is busy trying to survive. Yet he found himself checking anyway. Hospital updates, court filings, nothing new. Just the same slow process. At a private dinner that night, Belle Knox leaned close. You have been distracted lately, she murmured. Is this about her? Grant stiffened. She is irrelevant. Belle smiled, unconvinced. Then why is her name still coming up in funding discussions? That caught him. What do you mean? I overheard someone at the gala, Belle said casually. They mentioned Parker Hale again quietly, like it was a sleeping giant. Grant's jaw tightened. It is nothing. But when he returned home, he poured himself a drink and stared out at the city lights. He made a call to his legal team the next morning. I want an update on Parker, he said. Everything. The report came back thin. No breakdowns, no emergency motions, no financial desperation filings. Meanwhile, Lynn's days followed a steady rhythm Grant never imagined. She spent mornings in the NICU and evenings reading court documents Ethan sent her on a borrowed tablet. Every word he says without you responding becomes evidence, Julian had told her. And Grant did talk. He filed a revised custody motion, more aggressive this time, citing emotional unavailability and unstable living arrangements. He leaked concerns to a friendly journalist. He wanted pressure. He wanted movement. What he got was nothing. At the end of week 4, one of his secondary investors delayed a meeting. Then another. Then a third requested clarification on personal litigation exposure. Grant snapped at his assistant and blamed the market. But late one evening, he pulled up a private memo he wasn't meant to see yet. It referenced a pending capital shift tied to legacy trust activation. His fingers froze over the keyboard. Parker Hale. Across the city, Lynn held her smallest baby against her chest, feeling the fragile rise and fall of life she had nearly lost. For the first time, she didn't feel afraid of the waiting because she understood something Grant didn't. Silence wasn't weakness, silence was control. Grant Holloway finally decided to reach out. We should talk, the message read. For the children, for closure. Lynn stared at the screen and forwarded the message to Ethan Cole. Good, Ethan replied. He is ready. The meeting was set for 3 days later in a private conference room Grant chose for control. When she arrived, Grant was already there. Lynn, he said quietly, you look tired. She didn't respond. This doesn't have to be a war, he began. We can fix this before it damages the kids. The kids are in the hospital, Lynn said calmly. They don't know there is a war. Grant nodded. That is why we need stability. He slid a folder across the table. It was a settlement proposal, generous by appearances. In exchange, Lynn would waive claims to future assets and any associated third-party interests. I will sign, she said. Grant masked his relief quickly and pushed a pen toward her. What he didn't notice was the second document beneath the settlement, quietly included in the stack by Ethan Cole. Lynn signed where indicated. Grant signed last, barely glancing at the pages. He was already winning in his mind. As she walked out, Grant smiled, certain he had closed the chapter. He didn't know that by signing that agreement, he had unknowingly acknowledged the trust he was trying to outrun and surrendered the leverage he didn't realize was keeping him afloat. The trap was now fully set. The first call came at 6:42 a.m. Grant's CFO told him that 3 partners had frozen capital movement overnight. They cited clause alignment issues tied to the agreement Grant had signed with Lynn. By 9 o'clock, his inbox was full of requests for clarification. In the conference room, legal counsel looked grim. This addendum, one lawyer began, triggers disclosure obligations under trust-linked exposure laws. What trust? Grant demanded. The Parker Hale Trust, the lawyer said. Your signature acknowledges awareness of its activation. Grant felt the blood drain from his face. By midday, his upcoming funding round was quietly labeled under reassessment. He replayed the meeting with Lynn in his mind, her tired voice, the way she had agreed too easily. He had underestimated her. Across the city, Lynn sat with Ethan and Julian. He is exposed now, Julian said. Now he panics. As if on cue, Lynn's phone buzzed with Grant's name. She didn't answer. She had survived. And now she was watching the empire he built on control start to crack piece by piece. The boardroom on the 42nd floor overlooked Wall Street like a glass throne. Grant Holloway had sat at that table dozens of times, always at the center, always in control. Today he stood at the window instead, hands clasped behind his back, watching traffic crawl below, as if the city itself had slowed to mock him. The emergency meeting had been called by his own board. When he turned, the seats were filling quickly with advisors and investors. Marilyn Lynn Parker walked in, dressed in a tailored navy dress. Grant snapped, "What is she doing here?" Julian Cross replied, "She is here at my invitation." Lynn met Grant's eyes with clarity. The Parker Hale Trust has completed its preliminary activation review, she said. Any entity entangled with coercive actions is subject to secondary review. Grant stood abruptly. This is insane. Access isn't the point, Julian said. Protection is. Lynn nodded to the board. I am seeking distance between my children and a pattern of behavior that puts image above life. As she left, the board chair invoked the contingency clause, sidelining Grant effective immediately. Grant Holloway lost everything, not just his company and his image, but the illusion that power could replace presence. Belle Knox left him, leaving a note saying she needed space. Lynn, meanwhile, stepped into a new life. The Parker Hale Trust was fully accessible. She paid the medical bills of every child in that NICU and built a home where her triplets could grow up safe. Julian Cross stayed, not to save her, but to walk beside her. He asked her to build a life with him, and she said yes. Because in the end, her victory wasn't in destroying Grant. It was in the full, peaceful life she built after him, a life defined by love, dignity, and the strength she had always possessed. The courtroom battle for custody was the final nail in the coffin of Grant's ego. Primary physical and legal custody was awarded to Lynn. I just closed the door, she told him outside. She walked into the sunlight, finally free. Months later, her wedding to Julian was small and perfect. She watched her children breathe and felt a calm settled deep in her chest. Grant Holloway would spend the rest of his life explaining what happened. Lynn Parker would spend hers living well, and that was the difference. If this story touched your heart today, it is because we all know what it feels like to be underestimated or to have to start over from nothing. Lynn's journey reminds us that our value is not defined by those who leave us, but by the quiet strength we find to rise again. If you felt seen or strengthened by this narrative of resilience and justice, please like this video and share it with someone who might need a little hope tonight. We invite you to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story of courage and triumph. Your presence here means the world to us, and your support helps us continue to bring these meaningful stories to life. Thank you for watching, and remember, your strength is always greater than your struggles. Stay strong, and we will see you in the next story.